Hey, welcome to another podcast of Law Enforcement Unconventional with your host, Robert Scally, and our real-life shield maiden,
Wendy Schallmere, coming to you from the top of Bunker Hill.
Our show is dedicated towards assisting law enforcement in special operations to include military, rescue, first responders, and to all others who are trying to help protect our brave men and women in blue. Each week, we're going to bring you an unconventional tip, tool, tactic, or training from around the country. Please sit back, listen to our show, and enjoy yourself. Thank you. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Law Enforcement Unconventional. I'm your host, Robert Scally.
And this is Wendy Schallmere coming to you from the top of Bunker Hill.
At Bunker Hill Studios on historic Bunker Hill, where the Battle of Bunker Hill took place. Hey, Wendy, you have a good day today?
Had an awesome day.
What did you do last night? I heard you went out with Julie, and you guys ripped up the town.
We went to the casino and did some penny slots.
That's awesome. That's awesome. There's always something good to do around Boston. It's beautiful weather out today. It's incredible.
It's gorgeous, blue skies and sunny.
Well, we like to bring you interesting people doing the show. And one thing about this show, in my community, I get pretty good access to special forces and to a lot of the guys in special operations. And there's always kind of that one go-to person. And they're not going to tell you that, but, even in SF Brothers, but we always have people that we can count on that keeps everything like even-headed. You go to them, ask them training questions. And even on the teams, you would have the go-to gurus. Like these are the people who have been to all the schools, have done all the stuff, have all the experience, and the younger guys kind of get mentored by the older guys. And we still do that. And I'm pretty fortunate to have access to like a lot of really good people. So if I have a question, I get to call them up at any hour of the night because they're always up. Like everybody else, they're always up reading, traveling, doing something, very active. So I get to ask a lot of really good questions. And I had an interesting question, but we're going to tell you that more as the show goes on. But we have a really, really interesting guest today, Wendy. Today
we have JB.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about JB that he's not going to tell you about himself. JB is our go-to guy. I've called him on numerous times and asked him the reasons why. We talk about tactics. We've been doing this for years. We ask questions back and forth. I get to do that. And now today, the audience is going to get to listen to this. They're going to get to listen to some really good information. If I'm telling you out of any show to listen to this one fully. If you're in law enforcement and you care about training and tactics and new tools and everything like this, because we're going to talk a little bit about trainers. And we're really fortunate today because we have what I would consider, myself personally, a master trainer. And when I travel the country and I meet up with a lot of law enforcement, they'll ask me questions, and that's great. I get the basics, and we can talk a little bit more about some of more of the advanced stuff. But when we get to the advanced stuff, I like to bring in the experts, and that's what we have today.
A wealth of knowledge.
Wealth of knowledge. So,
JB, are you there?
I am. Good morning, guys.
Good morning, JB, and it's great to hear your voice again.
Good morning.
Thanks.
Is it snowing where you are?
This is one of the good days in Montana because the sun's out.
And I like to see. I think you just built a geo planter. Was that what you built in the side of your house? What do you?
I put a geodesic dome greenhouse, and
that's what it was.
People kind of jokingly wonder what I'm growing in there.
It's medicinal now.
Yeah, no, no, but that's
it's for the arthritis. Trust me.
You literally live in the cabin of my dreams. By the way. I wouldn't even call it a cabin. I call it a show, like it's something that belongs in a movie. If anybody's out there and wants to shoot a movie, contact JB because he lives in like the most incredible spot in America, literally. So, I mean, every time you post a picture of your living room, you post a picture of anything, people are like, whoa. And I think it was snowing there last month when it snows in the summer. I don't know. You have snow like a lot.
We have snow a lot. My cabin's at 6,000 feet, so we have to put up with a lot of snow here.
That's that's incredible, and I love the pictures on Facebook, and I'm glad that we're friends and we can kind of interject and see each other's lives.
Oh, we got to have a vector reunion out here.
Yes, and we're looking forward to that. And next, when we get up to your neck of the woods, we are definitely doing that.
That's going to be amazing.
JB, I'm really happy that you're with us today, and what I want to really get to law enforcement is we're going to talk a lot about training, how to train, what to train, training experiences, things that work, things that don't work. And this is really important, right? And everybody talks about the end result, maybe shooting or the training to shoot, but they don't talk about the other training. Now, before I get into that, tell the audience a little bit about your background.
I'm a 24-year retired Army Special Forces guy. I then had another 8 years in similar work with the U.S. government, CIA Special Activities Division, as well as other contracting jobs over the years, including development and delivery of training and education up through and including the graduate level. And I was a director of a National Special Operations Training Center. So I've both trained and operated in 42 foreign nations. And as you mentioned, now I'm mostly retired in Montana.
Whoa. That's, so you got a lot of experience in the training. Now, when you were in Special Forces, can you tell the audience what group you were with?
I was in first group. I was in 7th group. I was in 2nd Ranger Battalion. Before that, I spent a few years in 22 Special Boat Unit and things like that.
So you've done it all. I mean, I know I can say that from being in the military, but basically you've done the whole circle.
Well, a few things, admittedly, yeah.
Okay. Wendy?
What we would like to know, JB, is what can you mention about what you did previously that applies to law enforcement today and the training that they do?
Sure. Much of my work in Special Forces and afterwards was training foreign counter-narcotics police, counter-terrorism police, as well as national intelligence forces. And the concept of operations and training for law enforcement and intelligence are pretty closely universal, notwithstanding some of the cultural differences and unique national constitutions and laws that apply to the job. So training these forces involved training for the practical hands-on skills, but also aspects of local law and policies, social interactions, as well as we all know too well, the all too present political and unintended consequences of the job. And I think today more than ever, police must get it right now, because there always seems to be a cell phone photographer present when police show up. So that means they have to show up every time well-trained, well-equipped, and know the legal and also the social boundaries of pretty much everything they do.
Agreed.
They're under a lot of scrutiny.
Well, everybody's on camera today.
Yep.
I mean, everybody with a cell phone has a video camera on there, and the second they see law enforcement, what are they doing? They're putting their cameras on, they're rolling, and that footage is either going to win hearts or it's going to lose people. Because when people see how people react, even when someone's hyped up a little bit and they arresting someone, and listen, I'm not telling them how to do their job. Maybe we're talking a little bit about UW, right? Winning hearts and minds. And maybe that's something we should talk about, the word unconventional warfare, what that word really means.
Yeah, we find that too. And me coming from a different background than you guys, I was always under the wrong impression of what unconventional warfare was. Because it had the word war in it, I was thinking this big, ugly, horrible thing. And that is about the farthest thing from what you guys actually do. JB, if you'd like to go into depth about that, about what unconventional warfare is in its truest sense.
Well, I think you're exactly right about most people's perception, because unconventional warfare has always been kind of perceived as something spooky, dark, hidden, when in reality, as this concept applies to policing, it should be just the opposite. It should be out in the open, allowing the civilian community to see us, to know us, to realize they can trust us. Unconventional warfare, from my background in Special Forces, essentially means we incorporate the local populace into the missions we conduct. This all happens, of course, when we involve ourselves with the local populace, make them see that we are here to help them, to protect them, and thereby hopefully gaining their trust and support. and more importantly, their participation in our efforts. This is certainly relevant to policing today. And I think police have got to pretty much do the same. If the only time locals see a police car or police officers in their neighborhood is via, wailing sirens and scary lights, then we've already partly destroyed that trust, I think. And in doing so, probably their willingness to assist the police as well.
JB, I so agree with that. And how many times when you take an unconventional force and then you bring in the conventional force who say, this is how we do things, and then they're pushing the will of the mission down their people's, the indigenous people's throat, then you see them start to turn and say, hey, we don't like you. And that's why people say, why does SF teams operating in over 140 countries, why are they always winning the hearts and minds of the people? It isn't because we go in there. We're in there because we truly want to be there. We train to be with those people. We're trained as teachers, instructors. We truly go in there with an open, like you myself as an 18 Delta, how many times that I've been on a med cap, right? Or I would go on a mission. I'd be out there, whether it's working with the farm animals or pulling teeth or doing whatever I needed to do. But I was always helping the general public, right?
Yeah, that's true. In fact, one of the terms we used to use is changing the face of the effort. In other words, we change the face from the scary policeman to the people in the community who need help and need protection. And so I really do believe that police training must now adapt to the realities of a much more actively engaged civilian populace, admitting that we can't use force in every application, and we've got to develop those kind of special forces schools, or rather skills that we used to call developing rapport with the guerrilla force.
Right.
And I think we've got to find a way to make policing less threatening to many who now might believe that the police are the enemy. And of course, the concept of overwhelming force in a high threat approach or takedown is effective in a tactical sense, but I think also the damage to the public and total policing effort might very well be compromised kind of at the same time. So we kind of all realize the police carry out their duties in line with their training and policies and practices, and perhaps it's time to find some better, more effective solutions to our training. As an aside, I've got to say here, I think your new Vector Shield is an excellent tool for this.
Thank you.
Because it allows the officer to make an approach on a suspect with a little bit of an assurance that the risk to himself is minimized to an extent that might allow that officer to de-escalate that situation to some degree.
Yeah, and it works. It works. And on that note, you guys are mentioning unconventional warfare. That's kind of the police equivalent of community policing.
It is.
Going at different things.
Yeah.
And we have some amazing departments.
Good point.
We're all over the country, and there are departments that are now implementing that. And
Well,
I want to give a shout out to Chief Green down in South Carolina. He does this. He's got the shield and this nice cover. It's not, in fact, he did a community, he's doing a community event tomorrow. He's doing a community event tomorrow. But he has his officers go out, and they go out in the public, and they check on people. They're walking around with the shield.
They knock on doors.
They're saying hi. They're doing a bunch of other things, and it's working. It's working. It's a smaller department, but he has amazing results.
You say that because just as a casual observer out here in Montana, I was left with the kind of humorous point right now that I'd rather have someone point that shield at me than the muzzle of a gun.
100%.
Thank you. And that's, I really, talking about Chief Green, I really am looking forward to getting him on to talk about community policing. But you know what? I'll tell you something, Wendy, on a side note. He has a lot of background with the military, and I'm not going to let that out of the bag, but he's worked in a lot of areas, overseas, everywhere. I mean, he's very unusual because he's all about community policing, winning hearts and minds. He's not out there in overwhelming force. He's out there shaking hands, and he loves exactly what you said, JB. He said, I would rather deploy something before they go to a next higher level. And again, we've had some resistance where people have said, oh, I'm not going to deploy a shield against a knife. And I said, you know what? if you can stop the first initial attack before you get to your tool on your belt, then we've done our job. We just want to give you that extra 1 or 2 seconds. And if you don't know about us, at least call us, ask us what we do. We'll have a conversation with everybody, right? But we have people that have preconceived notions thinking that we're teaching to deploy a shield before a weapon, and that's really not true. What we're really teaching is officer safety, right? Every situation could be different, but we want to keep them safe.
It's to work under your SOP, but well protected.
Well protected.
Yeah.
And JB, getting back to winning hearts and minds, you hear that cliche like, oh, winning hearts and minds, but it really, really works when you show a little bit of respect. I was in Haiti and I was walking up a hill, and I remember that believe it or not, there were some pretty scary characters off to my left, and I'm by myself, and I looked off to my left, and I look at them, and I walk up to the hill. Well, the translator was behind me, and he came out, he caught up to me at the top of the hill, and he said, hey, you offended those guys. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you didn't say bonjour, or you didn't say hello to them. And I found it kind of hilarious. I mean, I looked at these guys and I said, oh God, I'm in a side alley. I'm in a tough situation right now. But the thing was winning hearts and minds. Simple. And I went down and apologized to them, and they were so happy. They invited me into for tea. They wanted to have me over for dinner.
It's important to know the customs of where you are.
Yeah, and that's, again, I violated the old, I violated our training. I mean, I truly did, because I was caught in a situation off guard. But I think that maybe some of these officers are in those situations too. But maybe this cultural awareness training that we do, area studies, and I'm not going to get into it, a lot of it, but that really helps us.
Well, I agree. And I do think there's a very good argument to be made that some of the skill sets of the Special Forces soldier could very well become additions to the skill sets in today's policing. I think everyone can agree that being proficient in firearms and arrest and submission, etc., are all totally necessary, but there's also an increasingly obvious need to acquire and utilize skills which allow for de-escalation. And as the old option is, the less than lethal option, without compromising officer safety, and the reality that the public today increasingly, I think, demands less force, more smarts from their police.
That's an important part. We're instructing de-escalation tactics that work, but the officer is actually better protected. It's de-escalation while protecting the officer. When officers hear that word de-escalation, it's a horrible term. They hate it. This is not de-escalating the officer. This is actually protecting the officer better, which allows for more efficient de-escalation.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
JP, let me ask you on a side note. I know this answer, but I want you to give this out. I want you to talk to the audience about this. What other special operations units have you worked with?
I was part of several task forces. I worked in a special task force, a counter-narcotics task force for Asia in Kuala Lumpur for quite a few months, which was fascinating because they would put up on this enormous white wall the structure of drug smuggling in Asia, and it's just staggering. I also worked on a highly classified project where I arrived in Israel and then was escorted to the Palestinian-controlled zones and literally trained elements of the PLO, hoping to more professionalize them. And that was very interesting and sometimes kind of scary at the same time. So I've worked in a lot of special projects. The thing that I was very fortunate about is I was rated as a singleton operator, which means I was cleared and capable of operating by myself, which really makes you kind of touch your sidearm routinely when you're all by yourself. But it also gave me a lot of insight as to a lot of the personal characteristics of the people I was working with, because I was the only focus of their attention, their questions, etc. So,
and did you find that your background in special forces in training, assist, and advise, and did that really help your training ability when you were out there teaching classes?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge about the culture you're working with. Even Haiti. I was in a unique situation when Haiti kicked off. I briefed all the generals and colonels on the cultural aspects of the Haitian people, their history, etc. And they found it very interesting because they then went back to their operators and said, "Hey, do this, don't do that," so you can learn how to work with a culturally different group without offending them and, kind of ruining your effort that way.
Interesting. And and you found that your background has really played into your ability to train law enforcement.
Oh, absolutely. Because law enforcement in the United States, a big city, for instance, they might work in 2 or 3 different boroughs or ghettos or, culturally distinctive neighborhoods where if they do not know the cultures, for instance, if you're in a neighborhood that is largely Islamic, the police have to be very cognizant of the fact of how they approach and talk with women, with children, etc. So the cultural aspect of training is probably just as important for police today as it ever was for special forces.
Absolutely. And it's changing rapidly right in front of us. A thing that was interesting on that note, too, when you and Bobby were speaking earlier, you guys were talking about knife tactics. And as well as knowing that part of it, you also need to know what the locals are doing as far as weapons. I know, Bob, they were some of the officers on one of our threads was asking about knife fighting and how Bobby knew or how our shield applied to that. We don't instruct any extravagant knife tactics, but like you were saying, JB, if you want to expand on that, you were in some areas and you knew exactly where the knife was, how they would carry it for the entire population. Jump in.
Let me jump in on this.
Yeah.
Yes, this is, again, we teach knife fighting, but it's not.
We teach knife defensive tactics,
there you
not
go.
knife fighting.
It's to deter the attack and then transition to another tool. You have to stop the initial threat and then have the ability to transition, not to stay there and play Bruce Lee and try to fight somebody, because that's never going to happen. Because you're not. The reality is. Right. And JB, I tell you what, you gave me one of the best tips. It was a conversation that we had about, I think it was over in the West Bank, and you said it was attacked by a knife. And you gave the most incredible reply to that. And can you tell the audience that one?
Sure. In many places around the world, the male segment of the culture will typically always carry an edged weapon that is specifically appropriate with many of the Islamic countries. Men will carry a knife. And one of the things we developed as a tactic is if you are faced with someone who's advancing with a knife and you don't want to, right away go to defending yourself by shooting that person, we developed a concept that we were all wearing essentially boots or hiking shoes or something. So in a situation where you were being advanced on with a knife and you could not withdraw effectively, you simply sat down, put your feet up in front of the person with your legs spread, and it's amazing the reaction you get because it stops them in their tracks. They kind of look at you like, what in the hell are you doing?
It gets in their OODA loop. Yep.
Why are you looking like a turtle? Well, you're looking at a turtle because however he comes at you with that knife, if he's presented with the sole of your boot, it's going to be, much less effective than the side of your arm, etc. And then the other part of that tactic was you spread your legs far enough so that you can present your firearm between your legs. And it was a psychological masterpiece because it literally stopped people who thought they were just going to, bully you, cut you, chase you away to one of, okay, cut my boot. I'm going to, still be here, so to speak. So it's a method, a technique, if you will,
but
that works very well.
Yes, but give the other half of
very
that.
Very low tech.
But as they're advancing with the weapon, and you can stop it with the sole of your boot, you're also transitioning to a firearm.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is that?
Well,
we're not saying to fend off a knife. We're not. Anyone listening, we're not saying to fend off a person with a knife with your shoe.
No, it really means that you can be very creative, and of course, the shield does the same thing as the sole of that boot. I mean, if a guy wants to dull his blade on a metal shield, much better than my elbow or, my left fat roll, so to speak.
Absolutely. And it's worked that way. We've stopped machetes and knives, and
Exactly.
that machete that was stopped in New Bedford was on our shield.
Exactly.
It's so interesting what you guys are doing as far as SF. And I have one other department that Bobby and I were in, and their tactical side of the house is almost all, if not all, special forces.
Their command staff.
And their command staff are special forces. And the civilian side of the house with like their accounting and that, they bring in the best of the best on that side, but their tactics are SF, and they do a different type of policing.
Yeah, and you know what it is, Wendy, and JB, we're not pushing special forces above all the other operational elements.
Not at all.
Let me tell you, these SEALs are great at what they do. The TACPs, all of them. I mean, MARSOC, go down the list. I mean, everybody's got their specific special operations guys. The thing that makes SF different from what I've seen in my experience is
you can sew.
Yeah, so well, you laugh, but again, right, JB, you're going to find guys on the team that do these skills outside of the military skills that add to the team. For instance,
build greenhouses.
Our engineers build. Our engineers can build houses, build schools. We do stuff like that. My sewing ability comes from my suturing ability, but again, the same thing.
Pace.
Pace. There you go. Everything has a pace: primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. But I find that we're not pushing special forces. But what I really want you to look at is, listen, we're not talking about shooting. This isn't about going there. It's about training. We're trainers. We go there, train, assist, and advise. Unconventional warfare. We have our missions, which is FID, COIN, humanitarian assistance. Go down the list. There's a bunch of them. But the most important thing that we want to focus on is the training aspect of how do we make our departments or our people better, right, JB? That's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and much of it, I think, and to be fair and completely in agreement with what you just said, the concept of special forces and bringing that to law enforcement literally means sharing our concept of thinking outside the box. Special ops guys are dumped somewhere for months at a time, and you can't always, call someone else and say, how do I do this? You got to kind of figure it out by yourself. And so I see too that policing is changing today, some by necessity, some by the fact that our population is more volatile, less respectful. How much more difficult can it be?
But JB, we face those obstacles all around the world. We go into a situation, right, where the team goes in and now they don't like us. And all of a sudden we're right. And again, people say, well, why do you grow beards? Why do you wear indigenous clothing? Why do you do that? Because again, when I say winning the hearts and minds, it's not going out there shaking hands. We're actually out there working with them. We hire them to work on the team house. We hire them to work on projects. We start to develop a personal relationship with them because we truly care about them. Listen, every guy doing this job is not what people think. Wendy, you've said this, right? They look at like you, for instance. You see you and Gunnar in the RV traveling across the country and say, "Hey, look at the guy in the RV." And little do they know your background. They would have right. You would just see a guy in an RV with a dog, and you'd wave on the road. Hey, how you doing? How's everything going? But no one really knows when you go into these places. When most of the guys in special forces specifically is. They're trainers, they're teachers, they love what they do. They're not going over to Delta, they're not going to CAG, they're not going up to some of the shoot teams or the SIF or whatever they're doing, but they truly love to go in and train people, right? And that's what I love to be on the teams. I used to love to train people.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that kind of brings me to another point. I guess what I'm saying in some way is that as a special forces guy, we cannot be just a good infantryman, but we've also got to be good experts in culture, society, psychological operations, even civil affairs operators, like you mentioned earlier. And we have to kind of understand that the dynamics of today's problems, including enforcing the law, can't always be solved via, force alone. So we've got to think outside the box, and we've got to take whatever new tools we can and put them in our toolbox.
That's interesting. Like even the word law enforcement, the word enforcement, to enforce. And we're not really enforcing our will on people that we meet. We're winning hearts and minds, and we'll leave a village or we'll leave something, and forever we'll maintain some type of contact with them. 10 years later, 20 years later, or something happens where you write to people and you really are genuinely interested in what's going to happen to them, and that's what the difference about what we do. It isn't about shooting or wearing high-speed equipment, because it's the most unsexiest, dirtiest job. Most people will never see living in a village for 6-8 months at a time. You have to build your own stove. You have no air conditioning. There's insects and bugs, right? How many times you've been on a hump and you look and you're infested with ants. You're being bit by red ants. You're being bit by scorpions. People think it's like this big sexy thing. I think you and I were talking about that one time. We're talking about humping through the jungle and how hot and not. Listen, I watch these movies and I laugh and I said, oh my God, you would never do that in a real jungle, because it would eat you up. And 20, 30 minutes, 1 hour into it, you would be a soup sandwich.
Yeah.
We were just watching. Go ahead, JB.
We used to laugh because we would say everything in the jungle wants to eat you.
Oh, Bobby was watching a video yesterday of these giant crabs that come out en masse. And if they smell blood, they come out like piranhas. And they think Amelia Earhart's plane landed there and the crabs attacked her.
Oh.
Bad day.
Yeah.
So what were you saying? You're saying that everything in the jungle wants to eat you.
It's interesting because when you talk about those kinds of things, I mean, I've actually been medevac twice out of an operation, 2 different times, because I got bit by some nuclear-powered spider that gave me, horrible infection. I had to actually get pulled out. So yeah, I'm really not a fan of the jungle anymore.
Or Amoebius coli with bad gastric distension, and you have IV bags going into people, and it's coming out just as fast as it's going in.
That sounds pretty.
Yeah, it does, but people don't see that part of it. That when you have to live in it. But you know what that brings up into law enforcement is again stopping your patrol car, walking amongst the people, eating it in culturally understanding people, eating the restaurants, being able to order the food in their cultural language. And how many times have you won people's hearts and minds by asking them, a question inside, even no matter how basic it is, inside their own language?
My standard question when I'm overseas, and of course, when you're a trainer abroad, they oftentimes want to show you their culture. And I think my number one question to my interpreter was always, what the hell is this? Do I really want to eat this? And of course, if you want to develop that rapport, you always smile and go, really
best I've ever had. I love this. It's so good. And you're not going to make that face. And I tell all the new guys, you'll suck it up. You're going to eat this. Don't even say you don't eat that stuff. You tell them how wonderful it is. And at any restaurant you go into, you tell them this is the best you've ever had in your life. And that's what people want to hear. How many times you've been in a place to eat and the food's coming literally off the ground when the chickens are running through the kitchen and they're asking you, which chicken do you want? So, right. and they're so proud to give it, and they have nothing. And you want to give them something back in return. And that's just, I just find a different mentality in the Special Forces community. And you know what, JB, I've said this to Wendy and a lot of other people. You know what's really hurt Special Forces is that Hollywood perception.
The movies hurt your image. I always thought growing up that a Green Beret was some steely-eyed killer. And like you said, part of what you have to do is be able to implement that when needed. But the better part of it, or the more important part, is trying to avoid it. and
Yeah,
working
exactly.
through unconventional means to avoid that situation. But the Sylvester Stallone and Billy Jack.
Well, I got to admit, I
think
joined up.
Bobby
I joined
missed
up
that
because
day in class.
I always say that I joined Special Forces because I saw Billy Jack do that kick, and then I say to everybody when I graduated, I said to my friend Kenny Hunt, I'm like, dude, did I miss that class?
I have yet to see that
I didn't
kick.
see that kick. I didn't learn that kick. And he started laughing. I said to
Bobby.
Billy,
True story, Bobby. I actually used that kick to knock the guy out one time. It was.
That's awesome.
I love that.
That is
I
awesome.
love
JB.
that. I missed that class, and I'm still upset about it.
That's the funniest thing I've heard all day.
You know, unlike, remember out on SOT, the Mad Minutes, where you'd go there and you'd beat on each other, and it was, and we had a guy on our team, a great guy, who was actually a Golden Gloves fighter. So we were fighting the Rangers one time, and we had him going up, and we'd send him out. He was a Golden Gloves fighter out of Philly, incredible fighter. And what we'd say is he was knocking them all out left and right. And they're like, hey, why? Why is he fighting? We said, he's the worst fighter on our team.
Oh, I love it.
If you can get through him, you can have our next guy. That's a funny story. But that's something we talk about.
I love the stories, and that's interesting to a lot of people. I mean, that's really interesting, the things that you do. And on that note, what are some of the most interesting things you've seen as far as training, JB? Like some of the best things, some of the worst things?
Yeah, good question.
Oh gosh, there's a lot.
The craziest
of them,
things, like the tennis shoe thing, is just crazy to
Crazy.
me.
Yeah.
Like something weird like that, or if that is that, or the dumbest thing you've seen
think-
someone do.
I think to do it best, I'll generalize and say, kind of bar none, the best training I've had was from instructors who are well trained and experienced themselves, and they don't seek to advertise their own accomplishments, but kind of in place of that, put that knowledge in the heads of the students who can learn from that knowledge. And of course, that means also having instructors that not just know their job, but who are also very good at passing that knowledge and experience on to others. One of the things that I had to do in one aspect of my career was to pick instructors. And I can tell you honestly that many instructors are not good communicators. And some have personalities that produce more eye roll than reactions, drawing students to wanting to learn more. So I guess some of the best training I've had, and I guess I have to look in the mirror and admit I'm one of them now, is from some of the old graybeards who had calmed down enough. They didn't have to impress anybody, and they just kind of gave you the best nuggets that they could.
Yeah, pass on that pearl of wisdom, and you always find it the most humblest men would do that. We had
one of the things, I guess I'll throw this out. One of the things that is most memorable in my life is I'm a graduate of both the SEAL and SF SEER C high risk SEER training, and I was a SEER C instructor for SF, and survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training is probably bar none where you learn more about yourself and what you're all about. It's really cool training.
Nick Rowe. I mean, we could talk for hours on him.
A real life escape.
Oh yeah,
just incredible. I mean, just a humble human being that would stop what he's doing just to make sure that you got what information you needed. And
right.
all the great instructors, like even out at Mont Lake, Paul Poole, he would stop, and phenomenal shooting instructor, and he would just walk you through it.
Yeah.
Just having a conversation. It wasn't this military lockup. It would be, okay, now listen to me. This is what you're doing wrong. This is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then they would walk you through it, and they would always say, I don't want you to work for me, work with me. Teach me how to do this.
Yep.
And then.
Yep. I knew Paul.
Yep.
Paul Poole, Walt Mitton.
Oh, huge.
And I'll give you a gee whiz. Colonel Nick Rowe signed my SEER instructor certificate.
Wow. See,
that was huge for me.
Yep. Ole Mize was back then, back in the early days. And and I remember every time they would walk into a room, the rooms would go quiet. Major Howard, right? Bob Howard. And I always knew him as Major Howard, not Colonel, but it was always, and we would be out at the Matter Mile doing our ruck runs and for a team PT, and he would just show up and he would just start walking with you. And these are Medal of Honor winners that you would look around there, and nowhere else in the world would you get to stand in the shadows of such great men. And every time I see like Roy Benavides, he gave me my diploma, or I see these names that come up, and you say, I've met those people, and it was always like incredible for the younger guys to look at that. But they brought their professionalism.
It's interesting because I know all these guys you're talking about. It gives me the shivers. Sergeant Major Maxim.
Oh my God, yes, man! Out of
and
phase one.
I remember hearing the first time out of Camp McCall that you talk to some of these heroes, and they very humbly say, "I'm just thankful I was able to walk in the footsteps of giants."
And that's so true. Oh my God, but we still keep going down that lineage, and this is why we do this show, and I bring guests like you on. We have to pass that knowledge forward, right? We have to give those pearls of wisdom to these young guys that are out there, young men and women putting their life on the risk. Listen, you're dealing with an insurgency, and you have guys like yourself and and I know you hate to say this, but experts on insurgency that can pass on these pearls of wisdom of how to win hearts and minds. Maybe it'll help a police officer that's going to get out of their car. Maybe they'll stop and they'll go into a restaurant and make a friend, right? And then if they have to respond, maybe that friend will be there. So that's the stuff that we're trying to do with this, is bringing an unconventional approach to law enforcement. Listen,
right?
I think working with law enforcement all over the world. I've done that also, and I've really been. And then you work with American law enforcement, and we're still working with American law enforcement. It was funny because I went down to the border with one of the agencies, and I walk into a big hangar. All the SF guys were the intel guys. You remember that, Wendy? I walked into a supply room. I had a guy look at me and he goes, "I know you, Comiagua," and I looked shocked. I said, "That was like 20, 30 years ago." And he laughed.
JTF Bravo.
Yeah, he goes, yeah, exactly. He goes, 30 years. I said, "Oh my God." He goes, "I remember you. You're from Boston, right?" But that's how small our community is. And we hear that because, I see guys like Bobby Shireman, my team. He was my class leader. Yeah. And you have such great people. And I see them, and I'm so fortunate to pick up Facebook and get onto SF Brothers, and I love that. And
sure.
Right? And we see them arguing, leave your rucksack in the hall, you see all the banter. But one thing that's interesting is there's so much knowledge there. It's kind of like a retired police officer that retires after 30 years. And they have, oh my God, JB, when you talk about winning hearts and minds, they can show up and just have a conversation with someone, and before you know it, they turn around, put their hands behind their back, and they're escorted. They're happy to go into their car. And I ask them all the time, how do you do this? And they all tell me the same thing: experience. Right, Wendy? We hear that. But that we need to get that experience out of your head and into the hands of law enforcement. Go ahead, Wendy, you have a question?
That's what I see with you guys. All through history, warriors have passed down their expertise and their shield to the next generation. It's on you guys. It's on the shoulders of you guys who have lived it, breathed it, done it, gone through the schools, and now you want to help make a difference and protect those who are protecting us, and then also protect the civilians. A better protected society, or the peacekeepers, can then better protect the communities in which they serve. And on that note, too, JB, what you guys do is so interesting. What are some of the most interesting training practices or tools that you've used or that you currently use?
Like PowerPoint or?
PowerPoint, here we go.
Yeah. You got to make PowerPoint slides interesting. I do use PowerPoint quite a bit. I still do a lot of training, mostly for search and rescue and local police agencies. But one of the things that I impress upon instructors, and I do it myself, is I always keep eye contact with all my students.
That's important. That is key.
It really is.
I know some instructors that don't. Yep.
Yeah. I was just going to say that, Wendy. I've seen instructors who, because they've got a little bit of stage fright, they're staring at the clock at the back of the classroom. But you have to make sure that you see interest, attention, understanding. And it becomes clear for good instructors, if anyone has that, what the heck is he talking about look on one of their students' faces. And the other thing I do pretty frequently is I kind of pause and look at everybody and say, does that make sense to everyone? And then again, scan for recognition. And the second thing I think that's very important, and it is a really good tool, is you have to find out examples that are relevant to your students. You can't be just telling crazy stories and, laughing at yourself and things like that. You have to come up with example stories that are relevant to what they do, who they are. And then that brings them into the training, I think, much better.
Yeah, and it's like area of operations is true. What works for one department may not work for one. Like if you've got a department over in the east of the country, it may not work for the west. And again, that's important to know your area.
And what's also true? What a lot of people haven't had this happen to them, but JB, we're both going to laugh when I say this. How many times have you went to give a class and you have to do it through an interpreter, and the class is watching your body language, and even though you're not speaking their language, and you're trying to throw a few words in here and there, but again, I'm teaching Turks or I'm teaching this, and they're watching my body language to see how well I'm doing it. And we can actually train them without even knowing their language through an interpreter, right? Through sand tables, through poncho, blackboards or whatever we're using, or I see that in some of the departments that they're starting to bring in the visual training aids like the sand tables. Right. They're starting to bring in, right? Not just flicking a power. No, we don't use PowerPoint.
We throw tennis balls at people.
Yeah, we do all hands on. So
to make sure they're in with us.
There's a really good, and that's a good example of training utilization that has to be tailored to your audience. There's a place for PowerPoint where you're delivering information, but oftentimes it must be accompanied with the hands-on and the practicals and things like that. It has to be mixed up in such a way that you maintain a student's attention and interest. I mean, there's no substitute for that.
And that's what, when we go into, on our end of the house, when we go in to train someone, this is interesting because we talk a lot about the Spartans, the Romans, and the Vikings, because we're teaching 5,000-year-old shield tactics that are proven. Don't put the shield beyond your lead foot. And I tell you, when we start talking about the Spartans, and they were just fascinating because they were protecting they had a shield, they had a helmet, a shield, and greaves on their lower feet. So they were protecting their lower legs, their shield would protect their body, and their helmet was protecting their head. So they were interesting thing was that they would all interlock the shields, and they would create a wall of shields. So what we do when we go into training, and I get everybody up because I don't want them falling asleep during the class, and no one ever does because I get them up immediately, we do circles. We put them in circles. And people always ask, hey, why do you do that? And I said, because I want you to get into the habit of facing an opponent. I want you to watch how other human beings work and how their hands and arms operate during an attack. It isn't just about shooting targets, forget about that. But I want you to see how a person puts their hands up during an attack, or how you're going to respond to this, right, physically, because we're not programming a piece of equipment. We're programming the mind. We're working with the mind and how it's going to react to a situation, right? So, and that comes in to, I want them physically doing that muscle memory right away. So by the time we're done with the class, it always goes over really well. And these are all tactics that I'd learned. I don't want to say tactics, but applications that I've learned in special forces where I would be out there training, and I'd get them immediately up there. We're teaching patrolling. We get them out there walking together, learning strides, learning how they're going to sound out there. All the things that we really can teach, they start developing. We start putting them in that situation where they can develop that. And that's what really good training has to be. And again, you're so right about that. Make it all relative to them, not just, listen, we had guys like, of course, Paul Poole and Major Howard were, I guess, were in Vietnam together, and they were in some pretty hairy situations. But they never really, they would talk about future applications of what they were teaching you. And you know what's interesting about Paul Poole that I've never heard up until recently? He would, and you would probably remember this. He could shoot upside down through his legs, around his back. He could lay down. He could do it in every position, right? And now they're teaching this 30 years later. What he was doing back at SOT in the old days, he'd lay in the ground. Or I saw him go upside down through his legs, center mass shots. He could anytime with a 45, just incredible. But you know what he said? I asked him, I said, why do you do that? He said, because he looked at me and he said, do you always think you're going to be in the standing position when you're firing? He said, you may be laying down, you may be on your back, like what you said, on the West Bank, you may be facing an opponent that's coming at you with a knife, but by dropping down low, you're disarming them, but you give that momentary pause while you get to your weapon, and then it's good night, good night, Irene. So the training, Wendy, you want to?
It was just interesting what you said about the 45. What we instruct with the shield is to go into a structure with a shield and a handgun. And I believe you and JB have had this discussion before, how your range of motion is better with the 45 and a shield than it would be inside a structure with a rifle. That was something that I heard you guys discussing before. And that's how the older tactics actually apply better in close quarters.
Well, they learned that in Vietnam, right? These tunnel rats have learned that in Vietnam, JB, right? When they would go into these small denied areas, they weren't going in with a tunnel or a shotgun. They would take a pistol and a flashlight, and they would go into this subterranean warfare, which is becoming big now, where they're talking about going in. How does that apply to what happened in the Soviet Union when they were in the tunnels fighting, and now, fighting, they'd pop up as an indigenous force, shoot, and then get back into the tunnels and scurry around the city. But that's interesting how it all plays back into the...
History always repeats itself.
History always repeats itself.
Yeah, that's true.
And on that part, and how your real life training or how your real life experiences tie into your training that you instruct, JB, what is the most dangerous situation you'd say you had been in, and then what saved you when you were in that situation?
Interestingly enough, it wasn't in a general warfare sense, but I was trailing. I was doing mobile surveillance on one of the Deca Cards guys. I had an Iraqi driver, myself in the front seat, and then two other gunfighters in the back seat. And we were doing mobile surveillance following this guy, who took us to one of the absolute most dangerous parts of Baghdad, which is called Sadr City. Well, kind of as luck would have it, we were traveling through a busy market area, and my Iraqi driver took a corner too fast, hit the curb with the right rear tire, flattening it. And, of course, we had to break off our surveillance and find a place to park to change the tire. So, as always happens in Iraqi markets, there were no good places to stop, too many people, all too close to us. So the driver got out to look at the spare tire and came back just all apologetic, going, JB, no spare tire. And I went, oh God, here we go. We're in the middle of Sadr City, full of Baghdad's worst thieves. And with two other operators in the back seat. And I told them, okay, we should get out of the car and find cover nearby very, very quietly. And one of the guys says, JB, are you crazy? To which I could only respond, well, either that or you sit in this RPG magnet while you wait for another vehicle to come pick us up. It kind of turned on some lights.
I'm with JB.
And he did get out and walked a few feet to a shade tree. And as you might expect, folks started gathering us, noticing us, and pretty much not in a good way. And one old man in kind of traditional Arab garb was literally chastising us in a way that obviously meant we were not welcome in his neighborhood. So I told the driver to ask the old man to calm down, and we would leave as soon as we could, et cetera, et cetera. But the old guy kind of kept up his tirade, and he and his vehicle were about 20 feet from us. So we just listened politely and remained watchful, and he continued kind of dressing us down, screaming, and then he verbally said something and drew his finger across his neck in kind of a very understandable way. So I told the driver again to try and kind of calm him down, and the old man walked to the back of his car and opened his trunk, and I went, oh my God. So I screamed at my Iraqi driver to tell the man not to do anything stupid, which is when I saw the butt of his AK-47 in his hand, and it got real serious real quick. I brought my M4 up to chest level on this poor old man and was dragging my driver with me towards him, screaming at him, tell the old man, put that firearm down, or he was sure as hell going to meet Allah that day. And it was all kind of ad lib. I had no script for this one, Well, the old man did drop his gun and simply laughed at me. And I went, man, these guys are crazy. Our extraction vehicle arrived like minutes later, and we just got the heck out of there and gone. But I was literally a trigger squeeze away from killing that old man.
We
and then of course, it would have been game on in a marketplace full of bad guys.
Would have escalated immediately.
Oh, absolutely. And what saved us? Cool heads, confident action, and relying on good training. And I say that with some degree of chuckle in my voice, because it's like, at the moment it was just, okay, here we are, game on. What on earth are you going to do, JB?
Well, that happens, JB, to law enforcement across America almost nightly.
Yep.
When someone goes for a weapon and they're asking them to please put it down, don't do anything stupid. And then and now you have to, if it escalates into a gang infested area, it isn't about forced domination anymore, because even though you can do well, you can't hit everybody or every target. So you might end up in the receiving end of a bad day, but it may be better off to break contact and go on and live, instead of doing what some people may have done too quickly. They may have gone weapons high immediately, and then if you're trying to talk, hey, don't do anything stupid, you got a smile on your face, you're asking them questions, trying to de-escalate the situation, and that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing that's happening across America now, and unfortunately, we're seeing officers that are being killed almost nightly. I mean, every other night.
One of the tactics that you used, Bobby, that I thought was interesting when you did close protection with Steven Seagal was, what color's your dog? Yeah,
every time I would have JB, I would have people walk up and listen. It wasn't that when they were getting that close, he's had he can take care of himself. He's a fighter. He can do his thing. But what happened would be when someone's getting really close, or I would have that one person that was shooting his mouth off and that wanted to get get attention. Hey, it's that reciting lines from a movie he did, and then and then it would be like, okay, now I got to deal with this. And normally I'd walk up to them and I'd say, hey, hey, and they'd look at me and I'd say, what color is your dog? And they'd say, what? They'd be like, what? I'd be like, yeah, what color is your dog? And what I'm trying to do is take their initial mind off of him as a target and put it now on me. And when they put it back on me, and I said, you don't have a dog? I said, let me explain who I am, and then I'll tell you, and you know what? I'd like to buy you a drink. But before I get to that, let me tell you a little bit about what's going to happen. And I said, no matter what you do, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. Because even if you win, you're going to lose. But what I'd like to do is buy you and your friends a drink, have a really good night, give me your address, I'll send you off. If you want some fan stuff, I'll send it to you. But you know what? You seem like a really great person, and if you want, I'll act afraid of you if you want to impress your friends.
But because you did that, you never had an altercation or an incident. You never had to draw a weapon.
No,
never. Half the time they thought you were the hairdresser.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you one funny thing I did. I had JB, right?
That's true, JB.
Bobby would make a great hairdresser.
He cuts hair better than most women.
Yeah. JB, I'll tell you what's another funny thing.
He dances naked better.
Unfortunately.
I love that. Listen to this. I did this one time where I stopped at this gas station in a really bad section of town with him, and there was a bunch of gang people inside, and I've got to get gas. I'm in the vehicle. I've got to get gas, and now they see him, and it's like, oh, now I'm inside, and I walk up to them, and they're looking at me, looking at him, and I said, hey, how you doing? And they said, is that Steven Seagal? And I said, Nope, that's an imposter. I said, that dude pays me money to ride around with him. So everybody thinks it's Steven Seagal. They goes, you're kidding me. And I'm like, yeah. I said, you believe? So they left it completely alone. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Because again, right? Again.
We've got a hairdresser with a Steven Seagal impersonator. Perfect.
Well, Wendy, I'll tell you what, that actually worked to my advantage all the time because I didn't look like the
You've taught me to work smarter, not harder.
Right? Don't have the high speed clothes on. I don't have I don't want that image. I want to know that I can diffuse the situation by talking my way out of it. But if I have to go weapons high, I can do that. But that's a failed mission to me because even if I win, I lose. So, right, it's better to, like, even with that old man in Sawdust City, even if you won that initial contact, you're going to lose in the ultimate end of that. So it's better to
that would have been only the beginning of the fight.
Yes, but it could have been another thing that happened, like you saw at Blackwater, where people were taken and exposed on national TV, dragged through the streets, and I don't, you know what it is? I don't see that as they did anything wrong. They didn't. But what happens is JB, even in training, right? We have to use lessons learned.
That's right.
And that's how
de-escalate.
Right? Lessons learned, how you de-escalate. Now, I take away from that time with that old man that, again, you were, and I guarantee you were talking to him, trying to be nice. Oh, have a good day. It's nothing, no big deal. We're trying to leave, yeah, blah, blah. And again, he's escalating the situation to a point that when he drew his weapon up, he wanted to see what your reaction was going to be. And again, you know what your reaction was going to be.
Yeah, that's true.
But training, getting back to the training and how to train people, but it's really important that we use lessons learned, we use experience. And I know that you use PowerPoint for policy and procedures because, again, you're instructing them on it, bump, 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 and they have to know the what they can and can't do. Correct?
That's correct. I mean, things like the classroom side of it is for information, to get concepts into their head. And then, of course, you got to walk outside the classroom for the most part and do demonstrations, put it to use, and make sure they understand, oh, this is really how it works. How it
applies, and that it will work.
So you'll do your classroom, and then you'll go right up to hands-on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are some aspects of training that you can do pretty much completely in the classroom, but hands-on is often the best teacher.
Build a memory, right? Build some memory. I always call it, I tell them, I said, listen, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to talk about reaction, or I'm going to talk about, OODA loop, or you all know that, right? Yeah, great. But do you know about Hicks law? And they look at me and they say, what do you mean? And I'll explain to them law of reaction. And then we'll go through it and I'll start to explain it and I'll see light bulbs going off. But then when we start doing the hands-on, we like to go out to the vehicles, correct, Wendy? We go into the hallways. We go into like denied areas, fatal funnels. We like to get them to, here's what we're doing. When all of a sudden you're faced with opposition and the Rolodex starts spinning, because that's what's going to happen, you're going to pull something out of your Rolodex, that brain, that one card you're going to pull out. Let's make that card work. So what happens is when it starts, oh, shoot, something's happening, you pull out that Rolodex, and now it's like, okay, this is how I'm going to react to this situation. You may not act 100% like that, but you are going to react. So let's get that training, let's get that memory into you now. So when you're in a situation where you for instance, when you have to lay down to fire, you're training on that. You're laying down, you're training on that. That style wasn't applied to shooting up until recently. Now they're shooting around. You see all the young guys, right? Shooting under things, under cars, through small spaces, right? The old days we were just on a range, pop, 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 qualifying with a target. Now they're teaching them different firing positions if they have to engage into that situation.
Yep, that's true.
And it was like you were discussing with Kevin this morning. We had a discussion with a a chief this morning about how the training has to apply to each person or each team. Bobby, actually, when we're in class, we'll ask them, what in particular are you dealing with? Say it's mobile homes or double deckers or whatever. We custom tailor the training with the things that they're confronting.
Or it's a narcotics team that only does car takedowns. I mean, majority of them.
And even as far as the person, a woman or a smaller person is ergonomically different than a larger person, and they're going to respond different ways. And you need to work within what they'll naturally do and tailor it to what you need to instruct them to do within what you do.
You know, Wendy's saying that, and JB, it's interesting. Normally we go into a department, and here's what when we talk about shields. What happens is we'll say, hey, I hear the police out in the back.
Someone's chasing a bank robber in Charlestown.
Yeah, I'm in Charlestown right now. So, so we go in. Oh, it's going to pass right by the studio. So what happens is we'll go in there and train them. And normally the biggest guy is the shield guy, correct, Wendy? It's always the 6'3" biggest person. And what happens is, by the time they're done with the training, normally what I'd like to see happen is everybody on the team should be a shield person. But I like to have the smallest, thinnest person, because if that door only opens up 8 inches, they're squeezing into it and they're getting onto their objective quicker and faster, right? Because it takes a lot more of the door to be open or the window to be open to get that larger operator through that opening.
We've had failed breaches where only the smaller person could have gone. Well, not that I'm in smaller, but
well, he used a smaller shield.
The smaller shield got in where the larger one would not, because the door was hung up on a breach.
Yeah. Well, the thing is about doing entries like that, if you're always the last guy in the stack, you never get that really, really special thrill of being the first guy through and saying to yourself, oh my God, who or what is inside on the other side of this door? And everybody's got to know everybody else's job.
Interesting cross-training, right? How many times we've done that where you cross-train all the time?
Yep.
And that's something that we kind of take for granted. I did a brief back one time, and we had, believe it or not, this is funny, when I got to my first team, we had 3 medics on a team, which is unheard of. And they put me on the Bravo side during the brief back. So during the brief back, the general asked asked the Bravo, who he thought was a Bravo, asked me a medical question, and I just went on for 10 minutes. And he said he looked at the team side, and he said, "That is the most squared away 18 Bravo I've ever seen." He goes, "You guys,
your weapons guys, no medic."
It was hilarious, and nobody said a word. And I was like, "Oh God!" And it was like one of my first brief backs. But training plays such a role in winning hearts and minds. And maybe that's, we see what's happening on the news, right, with law enforcement. And maybe instead of, what do they call it? Not getting rid of them, what do they call it? Defunding. Instead of defunding, why don't we start retooling and retraining with winning hearts and minds of the community? And we see police chiefs around the country that are already doing that, Wendy.
Yes.
We see it. And
with success.
With huge success. I mean, they got to, JB, they got to the point where they've got the community just rallying for them. And that's just so wonderful to see, because they truly want to do a great job. I think leadership,
right?
And tell me if I'm wrong, it starts from the top and it works its way down, right? The mindset of everybody starts from the top.
Correct. And Chief King is having wonderful results with the shields
Incredible.
in his community. They love it. They don't have a problem when they have to apprehend somebody. It's done safer. The community loves the shields. They love the officers walking around with them, and they know that if that shield's there, the officer's better protected and they're better able to respond.
And we had, let me tell you, we had JB, Kevin Nelm, one of the chiefs down in South Florida. But we're talking about center line protection, like we're talking about. And he brought to such a great point. He said, my center line and your center line and Jimmy's and Wendy's and everything. Is that my phone, Wendy, doing that? So our center lines are all the same. So what it basically is even though our bodies are different sizes, but our center line is virtually the same size. So when you can protect,
my brain's a little bigger than Bobby's.
Yeah, just a little bit. But when you can protect your,
I've noticed that.
Yeah, she's smarter. She's got the brains, I got the looks.
You're better looking than you are too, Bobby.
Okay.
Thanks, JB.
So Kevin, what he said was protect the center line, and everything. Once the center line is protected, right? Because it's all the same size. Once it's protected, he said, then you can allow to transition. Once your brain is protected, you can have better thoughts and better applications. And you know what, JB? Right. It's not because we make the shield, we're pushing it. But again, the direction we're going into with training and tools is because we need new training, we need new tools, right, to de-escalate, right? Listen.
Exactly.
You could have, if you were just, I don't want to say a Marine because I don't want to, hurt the Marine Corps, Marine infantry, and a guy goes for a weapon. We know what they're going to do.
Hi, Rat.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, Rat, one of our gunnies. But you know what's going to happen is it's going to happen. But with your training, when you're put into a situation where a man is reaching for a weapon, normally that's not going to end well. But even when the weapon was in hand, you still chose to de-escalate with words.
Yeah. And sometimes just screaming at somebody like almost shocks them out of what they're doing.
Interesting.
And it's funny. I had that very thing happen in Panama.
Yelling? Did you de-escalate it by yelling?
Guy came out of one of the things that's classic in Panama after the hostilities had largely ceased was the disarming of all the PDF outposts throughout the country. And a lot of people don't know that, but Big Army held the Canal Zone. Everything outside of the Canal Zone was run by 3rd of the 7th. Mm-hmm. And so we had every single one of our teams at a different location. And I was lucky at the time. I was the S5. And so my job was to go out there and help control all the de-escalation, police up all the firearms, issue them new uniforms and stuff. And a couple of times people didn't believe that the Army of Panama had capitulated, and boy, some of them come out the door ready to do battle, and it was pretty spooky a couple times.
I was I wanted to get into a cab in Panama, and it was down in Panama City, and I didn't see it, but the person, my Bravo, saw it. But as I went to get into the car, he grabbed me by the ankles as I was ready to slide across. And just then he hit the gas and he pulled me out of the car as the car took off. And I said, I'm like, dude, what did you do? And he's up and he looks and he said, Bobby, he said he had a gun. He said, I noticed when he was getting that when you get in the car, he put his hand on his weapon. And he said, "Oh boy, yeah." So again, he dragged me out of the car, and I was like, "Dude, I owe you one." But again, that's how out of nowhere you're going to see a weapon happen. And are you ready for it? Well, I always thought I would be, but here I am in a situation where I totally was not. Even though I'm situationally aware, 99.9% of the time, it was that 1% that I didn't see it that could have cost me my life. And that's what I look at law enforcement every night when I read these after action reports. And we do, because you know what, JB, our manual is really lessons learned. And that's a way we found to honor some of the fallen men and women in blue is by making sure it will never happen again. For instance, they put their head into an attic and someone shoots them in the face. They peek into a door and someone shoots them through the door. These are situations that we come up against all the time.
Yeah.
Right? And again, if we could give them a little bit more protection and make better use. Wendy, you have another question?
The only other two things, JB, what is it that you do? I know you instruct a training company, right? If someone is interested in getting your training, how would they get a hold of you for that?
Well, I have kind of switched gears a little bit. I own, my company is Viking Consulting. And what I have been doing is I still do some of the special ops training, most notably, the SO stuff. Mm-hmm. But I also teach here in Montana. I teach law enforcement, survival, map reading, land navigation, kind of what every SF guy likes to teach.
The basics.
No, I go even into GPS and plotting and stuff like that. We do some advanced work.
Nice.
But I also do I've got a survival awareness seminar that I give all the search and rescue people. helping them, understand survival and stuff like that. I used to do some executive protection, but now I've kind of switched pretty much to just site survey kind of things. And then every once in a while, somebody will throw at me, hey, I need this training. And if it's something I'm capable of training, I will do that too.
Well, you're out in some
giving back.
Yeah, he's out in some incredible areas. JB, I watch you on your Facebook, and I see some of the pictures and some of the mountains you're at when you're traveling with some of the people, like what you're doing, during the training. Yeah. And I just love watching it because you're out in some beautiful country.
Some remote areas. It's gorgeous. And the survival things that you do. I love your dog, Gunner. I think that's neat. And what I just saw recently, Gunner has a pack, and I wanted to ask you about the pack that Gunner has and how that could apply to anyone out there who's like in on a steer environment or out in the middle of nowhere who has a dog.
It's cool. Yeah, Gunner is a 75-pound Vizsla, and he eats and he drinks and he has to lay down in the tent. So what I've decided is he's going to carry that. And so what I do is I just put this, and in fact, I've got some new pictures I should show you guys, but we went out on just a 3-mile hike the other day with his pack on. I think that's what you saw probably. Mm-hmm. So he carries his own food, he carries his own water, he carries his own leash, and he carries his own sleeping pads and blanket. So it's just a way so that his old daddy doesn't have to carry all that stuff too.
But it's all self-contained.
Yeah, it is. It's really nice. He did very well with it.
That's interesting. And again, if you're out in a situation where I don't have my pack with me, but he has to eat, the food's on him. Yeah. I mean, it's there. Yeah. So there's a lot. Again, you and I could have a big conversation on how to pack your ruck, how to cross load, how to do all that stuff, and that's something that applies. I think we take second nature. Oh, hey, we know how to pack where the weight goes, where this goes. And again, I think that even in the civilian market, it would be a great things to teach them, right? On some of the survival.
Well, you're right. I mean, I've always been a really big proponent of survival. We call it SEER because we incorporate other things. But I also, when I retired, I also do a lot of backpacking and traveling in the woods and stuff. And what I find is all the way from high school kids to, grandmas and grandpas, they really just don't know what all skills they should have, what kind of gear they should have, some of the aspects of learning to look at the map and understanding the map, because sometimes the trails aren't as obvious as we might like them. So I really do enjoy doing a lot of survival training, both for private people. I did a big survival seminar for a big snowmobile club down in the Big Hole, which is a part of Montana. There's about 30 people show up, and they were just loving it, everything I taught them in an afternoon. So I get a kick out of doing that. It's kind of one of my ways of kind of giving back.
And again, right, operational area, you're talking about like mountains and all. Now you do urban survival where it's a whole different type of animal where,
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I think in the future, I'd love to have you back on to another show and talk about survival and some of the things that you teach. I think it's fascinating. And I think that it really applies to law enforcement, even being self-contained, having your equipment with you. What if you,
right?
Wendy will know this. What happened with, we don't want to mention the state police, but remember they were drinking pool water because they ran out of water. They were on a operation for so long, they were drinking pool water. But what happened? They had no food. They had to send out for a pizza. But what happened is, again, they're in an operational area where they can't leave, and now it extended, and they have to stay eyes on target. So right. So how does that, right? Now having food with you in your cargo pockets, right? MREs or whatever you need to do.
We were also talking about urban survival the other day. There's enough food and change in the average person's home to support a person for a week or so.
There's enough food in my car.
Just shuffle through the couch or Bobby's truck.
Yeah.
That's actually really good.
I mean,
it's true.
Survival is kind of one of my soft spots. I really enjoy it. like I said, I think I'm a graduate of the Navy SEAL and Army SF high-risk SEER courses, and it's kind of become second nature for me to put together my bug-out bag. And, of course, as a singleton traveling around the world, you always have to have that bag over your shoulder that you can just run like the Dickens if you need to and spend a few days either getting to some place where you can get picked up or, letting a bad situation calm down. And there's a lot of cool aspects of what you have to learn, know, and have with you to be able to, as they say, survive a few days out in the middle of nowhere.
Even something to barter, like, have jewelry or something that you can barter in other countries, right? Just jewelry and gems, and they carry weight. So, hey, I need this help. Would you do it for a ring?
Yeah.
I need a ride to the airport. Will you do this? Okay, here, thank you. So maybe it does play into that. And that's what I think in a future show, Wendy, that would be phenomenal, JB, to bring you back on and talk about survival. I think that would be
I think to go through one of the
fascinating.
courses actually would be.
Yeah, Wendy would love to go through the course.
I want to take Connie and go out there and go through it.
Yeah, her and her Viking girlfriends are probably would do it. Me, I'm.
Well, Bobby stays in with the warm fireplace, drinking hot cocoa.
He'll be on the patio.
I'm on mission. I'm on mission support. I'm on the. Mission. I'm not gonna. I'll stay at the safe house.
Well,
I'm good to go.
There used to be a lot of talk. People in the old days used to talk about having 10 gold Krugerrands in their pack. And I'm going, how ridiculous. You need a meal and you're going to give a guy a Krugerrand that's worth $1,600. It's like, what a stupid idea,
Or a fake Rolex.
Yeah, or a fake Rolex. How come you got 6 fake Rolex in your rucksack?
It's funny. I've traded away Prel shampoo. I've done it all. And people, JB, we both can laugh about this, but and I know that most of these countries the black market it controls the country. So you have to know who is in charge of the black market. And most of the times when you go in the military, is going to tell you where the black market is, who's running it, what they're doing, and 9 out of 10 times they're really fun guys. Hey, how you doing? They always want. I feel like I'm on TV. Let's make a deal. So it's
Well,
right?
what's the exchange rate between a bottle of Prel and a fake Rolex?
Yeah. What's the exchange?
Depends on how hungry you are.
Yeah, but again, that's you're right about that. The old school versus the new school and the stuff that works, and a lot of times you're going to be you want to be self-contained where you're not going to need to have outside help, or if you better be able to hump it out yourself, right? Because there's the old days. Hey, where's the pickup point? Well, let me tell you the good news and the bad news. Things have changed. Really,
it's right over that ridge line.
Yeah. I thought it was over there. No, I meant the next one. Oh, really? Oh,
well, that's funny because in a lot of my work for the agency, I had to go into countries as a State Department cover. So I'm coming out of the first class, cabin and wearing a $1,200 suit and then, carrying some kind of bag that looks somewhat discreet. And the concept of doing an escape and evasion kind of an exercise, with a Brooks Brothers suit on is like beyond laughable.
That's awesome. That'd be like the walk. The only thing you got to do with that $1,200 suit is the walk of shame at 9 o'clock in the morning, like when the sun's coming up, and you're like, "Oh God,"
Yeah.
When that was a great thing. Listen, JB, this has been great. So speaking to you, we're actually you are our longest interview at a minute and 22, 23, an hour 23. And now you know what?
But well worth it.
We could spend 2 more hours talking, and it would be just a wealth of knowledge. But we are going to do this because we're definitely having you back on and we're going to talk about survival. And I would love that. I think that it applies to everybody. And you know what it is? It's an unconventional way of thinking, and I'm going to burn this up a little bit longer, Wendy, but I want to tell you this. I talked to a couple of the SWAT teams and they said once the person ran into the woods, they stopped the chase. Now, again, they could, they could operate inside the houses, but now when they have to move through the bush in a ranger file, and do some patrolling, it got really confusing. So they chose not to make to go after that person. It became pretty dangerous. But you know what? Maybe the survival training and the this would be really important for them.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be real extensive. It oftentimes just shows these people how to put on like a 3-day pack, and what's essential in it. Can mean everything, because if the bad guy runs into the national forest, you can't just let him go. You got to go after him.
Well, you know what? Speaking about the 3-day, Wendy, how about some of the riots? We've been up in those areas, but some of these
where
riots,
the guys are held up for a bit.
Yeah, they're held up.
They're
held up for like a week, and
sure.
And again, they have to extended hours, and now the law enforcement is holding the line. And how are they going to eat? How are they going to resupply, get water? These are things that, like JB.
And that ties into health, too. You can't have crud food when you got to be alert.
Or high sodium with high blood
when
pressure.
You guys, when we're done with this, I'll email you my list of just how many Snickers and Butterfingers you need a day in a survival environment.
I love Snickers.
That's awesome.
Snickers and Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
You bet.
Says the health nut.
Here's my survival list. Okay.
Snickers and Mountain Dew.
Here's my survival list. How many stars on that hotel?
Yeah,
oh my God, 1 star. I'm surviving. JB, thank you.
By the way, where's the Cinnabon store?
I love that. But thank you so much. We had a great time, and you know what, Wendy? Again, normally we go off and we say.
We're so thankful, JB. Thank you so much for all the knowledge that you've shared with us. Thank you to all the military servicemen and servicewomen out there, law enforcement professionals who have sacrificed and still are sacrificing to make our communities safer. We thank you truly, JB.
Oh, Wendy, before this, JB, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, can they send you an email? Is that okay?
Sure. I simply, out here in Montana, use JB's cabin at gmail.com.
Awesome. And then this way, if anybody has any questions or you'd like to talk to JB more specifically, and we're going to be having you on in the future, like quite a bit, because it's a really interesting conversations, and I like the way you break down the complex to the simple.
Best way to train.
It is.
Keep it simple.
Keep it. Yeah. For me, it's good. Wendy,
I wasn't going to say it. Keep it simple, stupid.
No, I say keep it simple, sir.
Keep it simple, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, stay safe out there, JB. Give Gunnar a big kiss for us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, JB.
And
thank you so much.
For everyone listening, stay safe and
stay protected. And that is our show, and we really appreciate you listening in this week. JB, thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Thanks for having me.